All right, everybody, welcome in to the show. If you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, do all that YouTube stuff. If you're listening as a podcast on the Pump Fake podcast feed, be sure to leave a review. Yes, second Black and Gold breakdown edition of the show, talking all things Steelers this week. And over the last few days, we've seen, a few reports come out discussing Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith, their relationship, and dating back to around the end of the regular season, there were reports coming out that hey, there might be some tension between Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith, and of course, both of them downplayed it and whatnot. As you know, usually those things stay behind closed doors in organizations and in well-run organizations, I would say. Um, and like I said, they both downplayed it. It didn't end up being much of a thing. But over the last week, more reports continue to come out, and it appears that there's some real fire here to the smoke. Uh, Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette put out a report that claimed that Arthur Smith was more or less putting training wheels on Russ, taking away his ability to, check at the line of scrimmage, check out of plays. And from that angle, that puts a bad light on Arthur Smith, makes him look bad. And shortly after that, Aditi Kinkwabala of CBS Sports was on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh and basically said that's false. Like there's two sides to every story, and most of what was said, I think Aditi, if I'm quoting her correctly, said that was a false report in terms of what really happened. And like most things, I'm guessing that the truth is somewhere in the middle. My guess is this: the Steelers are planning on moving on from Russell Wilson, and he knows that, the organization knows that, and he's doing all he can right now to paint himself in as good a picture as humanly possible. So his camp is going to start putting some stuff out there to people to report, to make him look as good as possible in order to get as much money on a new contract elsewhere. And again, this is just speculation on my part. I'm not going to pretend to be completely in the know on all these things, but when you read the tea leaves and you see how things progress, you can kind of put together a picture. I don't think it's a coincidence that shortly after the Dulac report came out, that Jay Glazer, Mike Tomlin's closest confidant in NFL media, was on NBC with Matthew Berry and Connor Rogers, I believe, is who he does the happy hour show with, and was asked about the Steelers and said that he didn't think Russell Wilson was going to be back in Pittsburgh. The timing of that, again, coming right after the Jerry Dulac report of, Russ was done dirty. Arthur Smith was putting training wheels on him. He wouldn't let him do certain things. Having Jay Glazer report that shortly after the fact, I think we can start connecting some stuff here. And then Aditi coming out and saying, the thing that was originally reported isn't exactly what happened. So, like I said, my guess is that, like with most things, the truth lies somewhere in the middle of both of these reports where, maybe Art did put some sort of limitations on things. And, obviously the offense struggled at the tail end of the season. They didn't put up more than 17 points in their final 5 games. But at the same time, it's not as if Russell Wilson was doing extraordinary things in that final month stretch. So I think that, he's more than aware that the Steelers are ready to move on and is doing all he can to make himself look as good as humanly possible for whatever team or teams show interest in him this offseason to bring him in or potentially bring him in or do anything that he can to get as much money as possible from a new team. And all the momentum feels like it's in the corner of Justin Fields right now to come back to Pittsburgh. And we saw Art Rooney say in his end of season presser that they would like to bring back one of those quarterbacks, not both of them. And it just makes a lot more sense to bring back the 26-year-old who played pretty well in the first 6 games of the year, showed a lot of potential, obviously is a dual threat with his legs and has a big arm, and seemed to get better as the season went on, rather than the 37-year-old who is very much on the back end of his career. And like you saw what he was going to give you this past season. If the Steelers are going to bring back Russell Wilson, it wouldn't make a lot of sense because we just saw what that looked like. It was a very low ceiling. So if I had to guess, Russell Wilson, and I've said this for the last month or so, his time in Pittsburgh is over. He'll play somewhere else. Jeremy Fowler reported that the Giants showed some interest, which doesn't make sense to me either. Because if you're the Giants, you just won 3 games. You got a lot of things that you got to clean up. I don't see what Russell Wilson would add to that team. Like, obviously, he's better than what they put on the field last year, but that doesn't elevate them to anything more than a mediocre team at best. So I think it's going to be hard for Russell Wilson to find a team. Because look around, like a team like the Giants, they're much better off taking a swing at a quarterback in the draft or just signing a younger bridge rather than Russell Wilson, who, isn't going to give you a high ceiling. Russell Wilson is a guy that, similar to what the Steelers did last year, where, a playoff team that needs a little bit better play at quarterback to try to take that next step. And obviously that didn't happen for Pittsburgh. He played well enough where he's going to go somewhere else. It's just trying to figure out where that could be. It's a little bit difficult right now to put those teams into perspective or to figure out where it's going to be. But the Giants and Jets don't make sense to me. If you're Aaron Glenn and the new regime and with the Jets, you're going to want to, get your own guy, more than likely a young guy, and more than likely in the draft, and move forward with them rather than bringing in, a guy who's almost 40 and isn't going to put some, much higher ceiling on the team. The Titans, again, that's a situation where they didn't play well last year offensively because of how bad the quarterback was. Will Levis and Mason Rudolph weren't, world beaters. But it's pretty clear that Will Levis isn't the future of that team. Do you sign Russell Wilson as a bridge and draft a guy, even if it's not in the first round? If you take somebody in the second round, somebody later, maybe like a Jackson Dart, do they do something similar when they drafted Malik Willis? Do you maybe take a guy like Jalen Milroe later on in the draft and have Russell Wilson be, kind of the stopgap guy there? But again, all these teams, all these bad teams, I just don't know what that accomplishes. And if we go team by team, division by division, I don't think Cleveland would be the move. And if anything, I think they would try to pursue Justin Fields over Russell Wilson. I wouldn't rule it out, though, especially if it's on a 1-year deal where I don't know what the money would look like there. But, I'm not going to rule out Cleveland. And obviously the other 3 aren't going to happen. He's not coming back to Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati and Baltimore are doing okay at that position. AFC East-wise, I don't see any of those teams doing it. We already talked about the Jets. Patriots have Drake May. The Dolphins just gave Tua a bunch of money. And Josh Allen's pretty good. AFC South. Titans maybe. Jaguars no. Texans no. Colts probably not. The Colts are an interesting one. because you don't know what you have. Well, you know what you have right now in Anthony Richardson, and it's a very raw player who I think rubs some guys the wrong way by taking himself out of a game. And the physical talent's there. But when you got a guy who is going 11 of 30 and just launching piss missiles downfield all game long, there's a low ceiling on that. And he's got to be able to develop in all assets of playing quarterback, not just, you know, being able to run and launch it. So the Colts, maybe, that could be like a Joe Flacco type situation with Cleveland where he comes in, just plays fine, and everyone else around him is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So I think that could be an interesting landing spot. Again, I think all of the potential landing spots for Russ are teams that have pieces in place and just need that little kick and might not necessarily be in position to draft a quarterback for the future. And in this class of quarterbacks, man, I don't love them. I think it's kind of been the consensus is that, yeah, there's not a whole lot in this class worth, going crazy about. 2026, on the other hand, is the one that you might want to pay attention to. But even so, if you're a team like the Colts who might be in the market for a quarterback in 2026, do you want to bring in a guy like Russell Wilson who might put you a little bit out of reach? So those are the conversations that are going to be had internally with all these organizations. But we'll keep going. AFC West, him and Pete Carroll obviously have a lot of history. That's a team that would kind of make sense, even though they were bad for the same reasons I just pointed out, where, yeah, there's not really a quarterback in this class that's going to do a whole lot. But, if you want to be a team that makes a move in 2026 and moves up for a quarterback, then, maybe you bring in Russ for a year. But again, the Raiders could also say, well, or we could just stink again and start Aiden O'Connell and then ensure ourselves that we get a 2026 pick. But that doesn't feel like a Pete Carroll thing to do. And you don't hire Pete Carroll if that's your plan. So I could see that being a potential reunion, especially because, he's kind of got the band back together with, some of his coaching hires in Vegas. And Max Crosby wants to win, and Russell Wilson will give them a much better chance of, winning games than the alternative in terms of, starting Aiden O'Connell. NFC North, I don't think anybody there. Jordan Love, JJ McCarthy, Caleb Williams, Jared Goff. He's not going to the NFC North unless it says like a really high profile backup, which wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. NFC East, we talked about the Giants, but every other place doesn't make sense. Cowboys still, paid Dak last offseason. Jaden Daniels, fantastic. Jalen Hurts is playing in the Super Bowl tomorrow. NFC South, the Saints, yeah, sure. I think they're going to move off Derek Carr. And so, if you're the Saints and you want to bring in Russell Wilson, sure. But even then, that's a team that just needs to hit the hard reboot button where they just become massive sellers, they're going to be bad in 2025. And so bringing in a quarterback, again, of Russell Wilson's caliber, who he's not great by any means anymore, but he's not, a bottom feeder, a basement dweller quarterback. He's good enough to be not good enough in terms of where he'd get your team. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're the Saints. The thing that makes the most sense for the Saints is starting Spencer Rattler or Jake Haener and just really embracing being bad in 2025 to start this rebuild. Who else in the NFC South? Falcons, no. They're going to roll with Penix. Panthers, no. I'll say this. I right now, I will bet that I'm going to pick the Panthers to win the NFC South. The way that they closed the season last year, Bryce Young looked really good for the final month and a half of the year. And the NFC South is completely up for grabs. So I think they'll be fine. NFC West, 49ers. Now, I can't see Kyle Shanahan and Russell Wilson getting on. And right now, he's certainly not better than what Brock Purdy is. The Cardinals, unless they move Kyler Murray somewhere, I don't see that taking place. I don't think he's going to go back to Seattle, even if Geno Smith does get traded. That's something I could see the Raiders doing. Is if the Seahawks want to move off Geno Smith, then have the Raiders trade for Geno Smith. And if the Seahawks do that, then they are, again, one of those teams that's just embracing chasing a quarterback in 2026 and trying not to win too many games. The Rams, no. Similar to the Kyle Shanahan thing, I don't think that Sean McVay is going to want to. Like, Russell Wilson's not a Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan type quarterback. So that's a no. And yeah, that basically, did I miss anything? I think I hit all the divisions. There's not a huge market. Not going to be a huge market. The rest of the AFC West, I don't think I talked about them, but they all have. Like, he's not going to go to the Chiefs, Chargers, who both have quarterbacks. The Raiders are a maybe. The Broncos, we know that's not going to happen. So I don't see too many logical landing spots for Russ outside of, a small handful of bad teams who it might be against their best interest by bringing him in, because I think their best interest would be fielding a bad quarterback and playing the 2026 game, trying to get as high a draft pick as possible. I think the Giants you can somewhat make an argument for, because Brian Daboll led them to the playoffs a couple years ago with Daniel Jones at quarterback and a really good run game and a defense that played well. But the defense, obviously Wink Martindale isn't there anymore because of a fallout that took place, and he's now at Michigan. Unless you really believe that you can add other pieces to make a run at a playoff spot, I don't think you bring in Russell Wilson. I don't think that Brian Daboll and Russell Wilson are gonna mesh either. Like, Brian Daboll is like similar to Sean Payton. Like, he's gonna get on your ass, and Russell Wilson seems to not respond to that. Go watch, that infamous, the clip of Sean Payton just ripping him a new one on the sideline. I just don't think that that's gonna work. And I'm surprised that Brian Daboll was brought back, as was general manager Joe Shen. So I just don't know how many teams are really going to want Russell Wilson. I think it's honestly best if he just kind of calls it quits and retires, because he's not going to do better than what he just did. They can put together a respectable season, help the Steelers get to the playoffs. Obviously, it didn't end the way that they would have liked to, but I think that he proved enough for himself and say, hey, I still had something. I was able to help a team win games and get to the playoffs. I wasn't, the antichrist like everybody in Denver made me out to be. But at the same time, with all these reports coming out, I think that there was a level of, if any of this was, a plant from him and his camp, there's a level of pettiness there. Not to say that Russell Wilson's a horrible guy. Like, those are the types of things that happen in the NFL. It's a politics game at the end of the day, and you want to make yourself look as good as possible for your next employer. I totally get it. But from a Steelers point of view, I think, again, all these tea leaves connect. And if you read them well, it says, yeah, the Steelers are going to move on from Russell Wilson. They're going to keep Justin Fields. And Russell Wilson is doing all he can to salvage an image going into the 2025 offseason to try and make himself look as good as humanly possible for his next potential team. And again, where that will be, I do not know. But again, I think the best thing for him would be calling it quits, retiring, hanging out with his wife and kids. Because what he showed, he's not going to do better than what he did this year. Which he had a nice handful of games where he played very well. That opening month where they just kept winning. Beat the Jets, beat the Giants, beat the Commanders, beat the Bengals. All games in which he played very well. You're not going to get much better than that. especially that Bengals game where, he put up 400 yards. Steelers put up 44 points. He could have retired then. Just go out completely on top. But all these tea leaves say, hey, there was tension between Russ and Arthur Smith, and the Steelers are going to roll forward with Justin Fields, and that'll be that. And in terms of the Steelers, obviously this is a Steelers show. What that means for them, I've said it for the last month. If they are going to bring back Justin Fields, it'll be on a cheap deal because he's not going to garner, nobody's going to be rolling out $30 million a year for Justin Fields. I think it'll be very similar to the Sam Darnold deal in Minnesota last year, a 1-year, $10 million deal. It might even be a little bit less than that. Again, just depends on the market. But I think it'll be anywhere between a 1-year, $10 million deal to, 15 at the most. I don't think it's going to be much bigger than that. I think 10 to 15 per year is what it would be. And if you're the Steelers and you want to ensure that you have at least somebody on the roster in 2026, you give them a 2-year deal for $28 million with incentives to be able to earn a few more. That way you at least know you've got a quarterback on your roster for the next couple of years. And you do as much as you can to surround him with weapons. Obviously, he and George Pickens have, good chemistry and a good relationship. If they are going to keep George, then all right. But he can't be the only thing. You got to go out and acquire somebody. And if that means that you can get Cooper Kupp, then you go get Cooper Kupp. And if you can sign Darius Slayton, do that too. But it can't just be George Pickens and dudes like Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller and Ben Skoranek. Like, that can't be what you give Justin Fields. If you're going to treat him like the starter, then really treat him like the starter and give him as much as you possibly can to say, look, man, we're giving you weapons. Okay, the defense is still, a good unit. We are going to give you everything that you could have to show, like, hey, you're capable of leading this group, rather than just giving him scraps and expecting him to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And by the way, with that group, he very nearly went 6-0. So there's obviously talent there, but he's not one of those top 10 guys where he can win with just about anything. And that's okay. Those guys are hard to come by, and you're not going to find any of those just sitting around this offseason unless Matthew Stafford becomes available. Then you should trade for him. But in terms of, just Justin Fields right now that we're focusing on, you got to give him some talent around him. Got to make sure the offensive line's good. And you got to bring in weapons. And if they do that and Fields proves that he can play in that and they have a nice year, then that's great. Then you might have, a nice answer at quarterback for a little bit. And if he doesn't, then at least and then you got weapons in place for whoever you bring in 2026. So hopefully they attack it that way. Again, we're not going to find out for about another 5 weeks or 4.5 weeks when free agency begins. But if they're serious about trying to find out who the quarterback is or find out if Justin Fields is a franchise quarterback, you got to load up. You're going to have the money to do it. Justin Fields isn't going to cost you a lot. And there's a few very easy moves they can make to free up another like $20 million in cap. Let Preston Smith go. Let Larry Ogunjobi go. Restructure the deal of Cam Hayward. Now, you can do a few different things to free up a good chunk of change. And when you do that, try to make some moves. Call the Jets about Garrett Wilson. Try and see if you can get Cooper Kupp. If you can get like a veteran like Adam Thielen to be part of the rotation, try doing that too, because he's still productive even at 35. Like different moves like that just to load up and improve your receiver room because last year was dreadful. Just do everything you can to put good players around Fields. And if you do that, I think they'll win games. Again, I don't think that they'll be a Super Bowl team, but I think that that's a team that can do roughly what they did this year, win 10, 11 games, get a wild card spot, and then see what happens. Because they're well on their way to doing that before they pulled Fields anyway. So, but it does look like, for all intents and purposes, it will be Fields. It will not be Wilson. And all of these reports that have come out over the last few days, when you start connecting them and seeing, oh, okay, yeah, there's something here. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. There's definitely fire to this. And it seems pretty evident that, yeah, Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith don't necessarily get on. Russell Wilson's trying to salvage what he can. And the Steelers have made it pretty well known internally that Justin Fields is going to be the guy that they try to bring back. And in my guess is they do. Fields has made it pretty known that he would like to stay in Pittsburgh. He doesn't want to go somewhere else and have to learn a whole new offense again. And, you know, if you're Justin Fields, stay with the team. You know the system. They're going to treat you like the starter rather than put you in a quarterback competition. So I think that that's the best move for him, rather than going to a bad team and a bad situation, because then you're right back where you were, similar to how it was in Chicago. Stay with Pittsburgh and hope that they take this offseason seriously to get better and go from there. So that's my thoughts on everything going on, you know, over the past few days surrounding Wilson, all these reports, and what could come of it. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, let me know your thoughts. Let me know where you think Russell Wilson's going to go, because I'm genuinely curious. I don't know where he's going to go. And if you're listening as a podcast on the Pump Fake podcast feed, be sure to leave a review as well. Let me know your thoughts there. Let me know your thoughts everywhere. It's always good. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Enjoy the Super Bowl as much as you can. I mean, if you're a Chiefs or Eagles fan, I'm sure you're going to have a great time. If you're like, I would assume most of the people listening to this episode in particular, you're a Steelers fan and you're just hoping for something new in 2025 like I am. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. We're back later on next week with more episodes of the Pump Fake, with more episodes of Black and Gold Breakdown. Appreciate you guys. Have a good one, and we'll talk soon.